Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. So these talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hi, online folks. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. So my name is Martin O'Leary. I am the studio community lead here. I'm a white man in my 40s with long hair and a beard, wearing a red jumper, which looks terrible on camera, I always know, and I forget every Friday. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome. Is anyone here new to the studio today? Oh, yeah, quite a few. This bit's for you. Welcome. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We are a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So a few quick notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can grab a cup of tea or some coffee. It looks like nobody has filled up the coffee machine, but you'll figure it out. Or a glass of water as well. We do have a quiet space just next to this space. So to my left, to your right, there's a door there. You can pop in. There's a little room in there, well soundproofed, some bean bags and sofas and things. If you need to take a break at any point, just pop in there. We're not expecting a fire alarm, fire drill, anything like that. If you hear a fire alarm, it's probably real. So there are fire exits at the other end of the studio at either side. But if you hear a fire alarm, the studio team will direct you towards those. They are quite clearly marked. But again, my left to your right. And then there are accessible toilets and baby change in the corridor over there just next to the kitchen. Today's talk, Dave unfortunately is not able to join us in person, but he is joining us through the magic of the internet. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. So for those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Lautim down the back there will be your voice in the room. If you're in the building, please raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone so that Dave can hear what you're saying and all the folks at home as well. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. All right, today's talk is part of Other Minds, which is a season of work exploring different kinds of intelligence, animal, mechanical, collective. And throughout September, Watershed is sharing projects that ask what it means to work with minds that are utterly unlike our own and how AI can be part of a wider conversation around intelligence, labor, and creativity. You can find all the details on the website. There's loads of stuff going on, including a project which is on right today up at Dare Shack. So if you want to go up and see some robotic tortoises, heartily recommend that after the talk. Our speaker for today is Dave Evans. Dave is an artist based in Liverpool and was one of this year's Watershed Winter Residents, exploring live audio streaming assemblages as a speculative vocal system giving voice to domestic space. Today he's going to talk about some new works that extend this research more towards song to consider what a non-human polyvocal assemblage might look and sound like. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dave.
Thanks, Martin. So today I would like to just begin by giving a bit of background to my practice as an artist. In 2018, I did a residency at a train station here in Liverpool, which also had a permaculture garden on one of the platforms. And I proposed during this residency to go to the garden and set up a wireless network that broadcast a network along the platform. And I had all these grand plans that I made in the proposal. And then I got to the garden and realized that there was no mains electricity there. So that kind of threw my plans into disarray. But what it also did was it forced me to think about what other elements feed into our engagement with digital networks. And this is kind of a really pivotal moment in my practice. And since then, really, all the artworks that I've made, I've really tried to show the complexities of the overlapping networks and systems that we're part of. So when we think about diagrams of networks, they're very neat things, right? In the train station here in Liverpool, there was a map of the rail network. It didn't include lots of stuff. It just included the station. So, the thing that was going around in my head from that point on really was how can I as an artist make things that speak of more complex situated networks as they actually occur in particular places. So that this, as I say, this was solar powered. That's how I got around using not having any mains. We grew potatoes underneath it. We grew daffodils on it, and it broadcast a signal throughout the station that kind of pointed commuters towards the garden and all the different kind of rhythms that were kind of occurring in that environment. And since then, I've continued to make these things that try to engage with the complexities of different types of space. So that first one was in a garden, in a permaculture garden in a station. This is one that I did. It was a kind of a hybrid online gallery performance at the Blue Coat in Liverpool called Peripheries, where I made this jacket, which is a solar powered. It's got a solar powered Raspberry Pi in the pocket that takes signals from microphones in the shoulders and a signal from the end of that stick that I'm holding. And it broadcasts those signals live to listeners on the internet to a website. So that stick, it detects and turns into sound electromagnetic waves and radio waves. So I was wandering around the gallery, kind of moving this stick around, poking it onto things, and everything was making a different type of noise. So a light socket would make one noise, a main socket would make another, a video screen would make a different type of noise. The radiator would make a noise. We were picking Radio 4 up through trees. There was all sorts of kind of hidden stuff flying around in that space, as well as kind of the human chatter and the sound from the artworks. So it was just a way of trying to talk about how congested space is and how we are kind of implicated in lots of networks that we don't see. After that opportunity, I had all of this technology that I'd made, live streaming stuff and audio kind of sensors and whatnot. While I was waiting for another site to explore to present itself, I just started doing broadcasts from home. I have two young children, one of whom has a disability, so I spend a lot of time at home. And I actually, for quite a long time, found it quite difficult to engage in the process of making art in the proper way. So this kind of ad hoc live streaming that I started to do was just a way of continuing a creative practice and exploring the situation that I was in. So, for instance, at 9:30 when I came down from putting my kids to bed, I would put a mic on the washing machine and live stream the sound of me washing the school uniforms, or the sound of me washing the dishes, or the sound of the fish tank. And I kind of would do this and make these little announcements on Instagram. And I had some kind of quite sweet exchanges with people. One evening, I was doing the dishes and live streaming that sound, and there was a kind of a brief conversation around what we had for tea that night. Another night, I fixed the contact mic to the window in the front room while we were watching TV, and it was raining. and somebody on the other side of the city contacted me and said, it's not raining over here. And that was kind of like when you start, as a parent and you're quite isolated, you sort of, yeah, it was just nice to be able to be engaged in these small exchanges and kind of share the monotony of um of those moments. And all of that was available through a similar sort of interface. Just it was all it's all very basic. The live streaming, live audio streaming aspect of it uses Icecast, which has been around since like 1998. It's open source. Um, yeah, so it served a purpose for a good while, and the more I did it, the more I was kind of enjoying it and thinking about it. So I started to do a bit of research around the sounds of domestic space, and because one thing that began to happen is that I exhausted the audible sounds quite quickly, um, and I became kind of tuned into the sounds of the home. And you begin to realize that domestic labor by design is quiet. Um, I think it's a selling point for domestic devices to be um, as quiet as possible. This is an ad from a piece of research that I looked at um, that shows an ad for a vacuum cleaner from the 30s, where the child is listening, is kind of amazed at how quiet the the Hoover is. Um, So yeah, it began made me think about who gets to make noise, who is silent, who has to be quiet. And I come across another nice bit of research that talked about these things, these lazy lady Doritos, which were proposed by Doritos, PepsiCo in 2018 as a cleaner and quieter version of the snack. Um, the CEO of PepsiCo said of women, they don't like to crunch too loudly in public, and they don't lick their fingers generously, and they don't like to pour the little broken pieces and the flavor into their mouths. Which, this research made me think about how the objects and the devices and the networks that we're part of, although they have a materiality, they also shape who we are and how we interact with the world. So something as simple as a packet of crisps, that is sort of telling that person how they are meant to, behave in the world. And that is marketed, and through that it's kind of encouraged. So I was sort of thinking, well, this is nice, this idea of not refusing to be quite so silent and using these moments to actually generate a bit of noise. Um, Also, this is a couple of slides that talk about um, the sort of logic of late capitalism, whereby everything is abstracted and things. This is on the image on the left is Khloe Kardashian's pantry from Instagram, and it's from an article on Dilettante Army, um, and it's sort of an extreme like image that illustrates how things are kind of containerized, separated. The kitchen, I think, is like a classic example of how things are kind of forced into particular grid-like order in theory. In practice, however, life isn't like that. And my life especially isn't like that. Caring for young children and children with, a child with a disability, things can be very chaotic. Things bleed across spaces, doors fall off, things fall out, things get mixed up. So these sort of assemblages that I was making and broadcasting kind of felt like a bit of a pushback against that kind of logic of neatness and silence or quietness, really. And I would, believe it or not, I was doing those broadcasts for a couple of years. And I eventually got a bit of money from the Arts Council to build an archive of them, um, which came at a good time because I thought I've got to maybe take some time off here from doing these broadcasts and have a think about what it is I'm actually doing. Um, and it was nice to see the archive, and it's nice to be able to kind of look at all of these broadcasts and listen to some of them and think about what was happening. But what I was struggling, I'd get into conversations with people and be like, "Oh, what are you doing with your art?" And I'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm like broadcasting the sound of the fridge." And I was trying to sort of think about how to frame it as a practice. What is it? Radio? I went through a phase of thinking I was sort of hosting radio. These were like radio shows but instead of me being the host, it's like the washing machine is the host. But something about that world of radio, it just didn't quite kind of click. Um, and it was around the time that the Watershed, the invite to make a proposal to Watershed came up, and I just, in my research, kind of happened across an image of a model of the human vocal system. The human vocal system is actually made up of a set of three subsystems. So you've got your lungs that provide the breath and the air. That's forced through your larynx, the phonatory system that produces the noise. And then you've got your mouth and your tongue and your teeth and your lips. That's the resonatory system that that shapes the sound. So kind of power supply, um, noise making part and noise shaping part. And I thought, that's a really kind of lovely way of thinking about the production of sound as the kind of working together of separate systems. So I wrote a proposal to Watershed saying I would like to come along to do the residency and think about like if just ask the question, can a house or a set of domestic devices be considered as a vocal system, a vocal system? And obviously, other things get to speak. The idea of the non-human voice is nothing new. We have Alexa and Siri, and there are things that in culture that machines in culture that are allowed to speak. Um, so yeah, I started the residency, and it gave me a really good chance to kind of jump into this new world of voice. And this was only in February this year, so this is all very kind of new territory for me. The research that I was doing it immediately started to throw things up that I was getting really excited about. There's this book, For More Than One Voice, um, by Adriana Cavalriero, and she talks about how the voice, despite the fact that it's the result of a set of systems, um, is an individual. It's kind of it's a singular reflection of a set of physical elements. So the human voice, it involves the throat, saliva. It's comes from the inside, but it ends up outside. So all of this, I was like, yeah, that is just right. And one thing that you kind of bump into quite quickly when you're working with voice is this sort of its relationship to language. And obviously a fridge is never going to say words. It's never going to kind of engage in that symbolic language. Well, maybe it could, but it wouldn't be the fridge. It would be a smart fridge or whatever. But aside from that linguistic side of the voice, you also have this kind of expressive side to the voice, which kind of appears through song and other kind of expressions like laughter and wailing and all of these other things. But it's a song that stuck out to me. And there's this other quote from Ito Calvino from a short story of his called A King Listens, where a king over, he's getting pretty sick of his situation, lots of different voices coming at him from all his different advisors, but then he hears a woman in the distance singing, this voice offering itself in song, he says, and he's sort of transfixed by it. And the way it's kind of described is that this voice in song is a celebration of its self as a system. Yeah. So it's not about producing abstract language that needs to be encoded and decoded, a standardized kind of language. It's about something, a particularly unique set of lungs and throats and tongues and all of that kind of coming together and celebrating its own existence. And I was like, oh, that is really lovely, that idea that a song, like a voice in song, can celebrate just this unique set of circumstances that it's the product of. And it made me think about, being in the kitchen and, putting a mic on the fridge and a mic on the washing machine and then kind of wandering around with an electromagnetic sensor and producing this mad kind of noise. And what it felt like, I did start to think of it as like a song that expresses the particular logic of the house in that moment and all its kind of complexities around care and shelter and all of these other things. So yeah, it was making more and more sense as I was working my way through it. And I have all of these sort of highfalutin, fantastical ideas about how the metaphor fits, and then one of the other things that I wanted to do during the residency, obviously, is try to put this thing into practice. So what the residency allowed me to do was begin to think about like what constitutes a song and singing. So I started to look at like just buying like guitar, like I bought a vocal harmonizer pedal for a mic, but I started feeding other objects through it. So like this is in the back room, the maker space, and I put some sensors around a fan, portable fan, and ran all of that through the harmonic pedal, and it produced kind of quite a magical sound. Actually, let me play it. This is the video. And I think this was the first point where I thought this perhaps could move towards song. And the rest of the residency, basically, I spent, the rest of the residency, I spent thinking about different ways of creating harmonies or taking a signal and harmonizing it so it become more song-like. So all of these sounds were all kind of existing within the spaces. I was just kind of processing them so you could begin to think of them as song or voice. And what started during residency is that I had to play with pure data, which is like a visual programming language that allows you to manipulate process sound in real time. So whereas with the guitar pedal thing, I had two voices that I could play with, to harmonize with. With pure data, I could make like 16 voices or 32 voices or whatever. So I spent some of the time building a thing out of pure data, which allowed me a little bit more control over that process of harmonization. And I ended up with this, which is it's an audio interface with 4 inputs and then a MIDI interface that was attached to a Raspberry Pi. And then I could feed in 4 different audio inputs put them through the Raspberry Pi, and then harmonize them and adjust those harmonies using the MIDI interface. So this is what this sounds like. You really need to listen to. There's obviously on the night I was there kind of adjusting the harmonies, and other people were having a little play with it, and the sound was shifting. And yeah, that was kind of at the end of the residency. And alongside that, I broadcast it over the web to this site because one of the things that I was interested in was how the voice can, the voice is amplified. I'm stuck at home, kind of washing underpants and whatnot. How can that voice be amplified? And that's where the live streaming side of things came in. So it's always important that there's like a public facing element to it. And this page was where the public could listen in to what was happening in the home or in the studio or whatever. So that's kind of where I left the residency. And where I've gone since then really is to continue to think about this process of changing a non-human thing into a human sounding thing, and why you might want to do that. And I've always been a fan of Jane Bennett, and there are bits of Vibrant Matter, a book that I've been revisiting since that. In it, she talks about how, while it's important to follow the trail of human power to expose these hegemonies, there's also a public value in following the sense of a non-human thingly power, the material agency of natural bodies and technological artifacts. And this kind of speaks to that idea that the things that we're surrounded by they shape the way we live. And you're going to really kind of understand that through paying attention to them. And this idea of following the scent of a non-human thingly power was really interesting to me. You know, I would be kind of imagine being stood in front of the fridge and looking at it, and it's such an inert object. But the minute you kind of attach a contact mic to it, or you start moving an electromagnetic sensor next to it, then you begin to realize that there's more. It's not inert in any way, shape, or form. It is active, and it's part of a network. It's a network of it keeps, food goes in and out of it that come from different places. It contains gases, it contains metals, electricity kind of circulates around it. So, this idea of following things to better understand them, I think is really interesting. And another thing that I've not struggled with it. I quite enjoy it. Is the absurdity of the process. It's not lost on me that it's a slightly ridiculous thing, a very ridiculous thing to kind of announce that you're broadcasting the sound of your fish tank at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. But there is another paragraph in Vibrant Things where Jane Bennett asks about what method could possibly be appropriate for speaking a word for vibrant matter. How can we begin to speak for these things or allow them to speak for themselves? And what she then goes on to say is what seems to be needed is a certain willingness to appear naive or foolish, to affirm what Adorno calls his clownish traits. So I kind of enjoyed that. thinking that the absurdity of this thing is possibly a sign that it is a useful thing to do. Yeah. So the idea of engaging with a non-human voice and giving voice or finding voice, it continued to make sense to me. I've also been kind of thinking about noise and when I'm not a sound artist. I've always had an interest in sound, but I've not really ever used it to any significant amount in my practice, and until the last couple of years, really. And when you begin, you start, you're bumping up against the difference between a sound and a noise, and a sound and a voice. And it's been nice to engage with all of that. And I came across this really good, that it's like a 30-part documentary that was on Radio 4 a few years ago, called Noise: A Human History. And it talks about all different aspects of noise, but there was one part of it that really kind of stuck out to me, which I've made a recording of, and I'm going to play for you now. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
These are the Bayaka pygmies of the rainforests of the Central African Republic, in a recording held at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. The men are chanting and drumming as they get ready for a net hunt, while choirs of women weave shimmering webs of polyphonic sound to entice the forest spirits to dance and bless the hunt. Those dressed as the spirits also harangue the hunters in their falsetto voices when their rhythms don't quite come together. Sing better, drum better, and you will eat tomorrow. There's lots of information in these sounds, but what's being created is coordination and mutual trust, the individual giving way to the group. What we're also hearing is entrainment, when different rhythms start to interact and then synchronize. It's listening to music and starting to tap our feet in time. It's a group of soldiers adjusting their pace to march in unison. It's an individual bodily rhythm being subsumed into a collective rhythm.
So I listened to that and did a bit of research into kind of communal singing and the function of communal singing. And I think these Bayaka, the Bayaka, the singing and dancing together, it kind of reflects and reproduces the egalitarian ethos. And because all of the members take part, and there's a varied contribution by everybody, and everything kind of there's no one voice is elevated over any of the others. And what I kind of discovered is that authoritarian societies tend to privilege the individual voice, and the separation between the audience and the performer, whereas more egalitarian societies use a lot more communal and participatory kind of singing as a way of encouraging social cohesion. So the idea that I might be kind of at home or in a space, kind of engaging with these non-human elements and listening to them, there's something in there that helps me sort of feel like perhaps I am tuning into something, I'm part of something, and celebrating something bigger than just my individual kind of circumstances. And that research is really ongoing. I've done a bit of research into like choirs and thinking about how they're structured. But another thing that I've kind of come across that has been really useful is the idea of the myth. And I'm going to, for the last bit of the talk, just talk about metamorphosis myths in particular. There we go. Sorry. Okay. So what does it mean to give a thing a voice, give another thing a voice? And while I was just kind of doing that thing that you do when you're researching and kind of just Googling and sort of casting my net quite wide, I came across an essay by this Pauline Leven, who's an academic from the US, and she's written this book, Music and Metamorphosis in Greco-Roman Thought. And she's written about lots of Greek and Roman myths where humans turn into animals and animals get voices. Yeah. So what is happening is that there's this kind of ontological shift where people shift, beings kind of shift between ontological states, animal, human, human, animal. And what Leven talks about, which I thought was really interesting, was that imperial and classical societies were very rigidly hierarchical in that you have like the gods at the top, you have the humans, and then you have the animals down there. And the metamorphosis myths for Leven, what they do is they offer an opportunity to disrupt those hierarchies and to think more broadly about our relationships to other things. So I got quite excited by this because it again speaks to this idea that we're all kind of compartmentalized and isolated, and we have these roles that kind of fix us in fix us into particular tasks that have various levels of audibility or various levels of visibility. And if you begin to apply these ideas of metamorphosis to these tasks or these places, then that metamorphosis can open up connections and can make those connections more apparent. So me in the kitchen, sticking stuff to various devices and making a song out of it and saying, "Oh, I listen to the kitchen sing." That process of metamorphosis, I'm anthropomorphizing the kitchen, shifting it into a kind of a ontologically human kind of realm. But through that process, I think what it points to is the fact that it's not clearly defined. For me, it's not clearly defined. I have my boundaries as a human, but I also rely on electricity. I rely on water. I rely on food turning up from the supermarket. I rely on my children, that pad around. So that voice becomes kind of an articulation of this space as having a kind of a life of its own that lots of different things feed into. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but I've enjoyed it, and I've never been one for reading like Plato or any of those things. I've gotten really into. There's a particular part in Plato's Phaedrus where he talks about cicadas and cicadas. The myth goes that the muses, there's a bunch of guys that got so enchanted by the song of the muses that they that they couldn't divert their attention and they died. So when they died, the muses turned them into cicadas so they could sing forever until they continued to sing forever until they died. And these cicadas in the story are kind of like these they're like secret agents for the gods. So they live in this story and they report back to the gods for about what men are up to, basically. So the thing that I like about this story is that the cicadas, there's a really there's a way of putting this that I'm going to have to read. So the voice of the cicada in the myth is watching the men. I'm not going to go into the story because we haven't got time, but the cicadas are kind of watching what men are up to and reporting back. So, and the voice of the cicada is the report. So vision, the voice, with the power of vision, it becomes invested in a kind of reporting. So they are the cicadas are speaking of a particular experience. And they're tiny. There's millions of them. You all know kind of cicadas. It's not a singular voice. It's sort of like a sea of sounds that emit. And this idea that the presence of a voice indicates something that is there. And again, this might be a bit of a stretch, but when I put a mic on the fridge or on the washing machine, what it begins to do is report that there are other activities going on. It's not passive and inactive. It speaks of other things. I had a really interesting talk with James Bridle during the residency, and we were talking about like the quiet fridge in the kitchen, and he made the point that that fridge is only quiet because it's only quiet in this moment. All of the materials that went into it are the product of a lot of noise. And I kind of like that idea that the convenience of the fridge and the silence of the fridge comes at the cost of noise elsewhere. Yeah. Activities, transportation, mining, all sorts of stuff. And just like the cicadas are reporting to the gods, it feels a bit like the voice of the fridge or whatever it is reporting the sound, and it's kind of bearing witness to all these other sounds that are embedded in the object. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, and I'm very much kind of wrestling with this still, but I love the idea of this metamorphosis narrative, and the idea of kind of mixing things as a way of thinking differently about objects and places. This is really new work that I presented just this week in Munich. I was in an exhibition at the Museum of, not the museum, the University of Theatre and Music, called Banal Devices. And this is the most recent iteration of the voice work, and it is a box that takes signals from the exhibition space. And it's got what I've moved into is something where it's generative. So now it's still run using pure data, and it's still connected. This is connected to a main socket. It's connected to a radiator. There's one just there on a stand in the middle of the hall. And it's feeding in audio signals and harmonizing them, but it's got lots of timers inside it that automatically generate kind of the kind of the swell and fall of the different harmonies. So it's completely, there's no sort of human engagement in it once it's set off, and it produces these kind of random harmonic compositions that are made up from all of the different devices. And like, I thought I'd recorded it. I mean, I can't believe how stupid I am. I thought I'd recorded it, but it didn't work. So I have no audio to share with you, unfortunately. But it's sounding more and more like song with each iteration that happens, and that's where I'm up to now. I've covered over my clock. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I think I'm pretty much done. Have I gone over?
I think you're good. If you got more,
All right. Can I stop there? Is that okay?
you're welcome to stop there. All right, thank you very much, Dave. Do we have any questions in the room? Anyone want to ask a question for Dave? I'm gonna ask a question for Dave then. So you say you're adding more and more this sort of generative quality to this. So how much do you feel like you're adding your own voice to this? Wow.
Well, that's a really good question, actually, because I think there are two things, really. The first thing is that I do like a kind of like droney type music. So I think the way that I've set it up, it's very droney. So I think my voice comes through in the kind of the choice of the tempo of it. Because I could be chopping this up and trying to make it sound like techno or something, but I haven't. I'm kind of interested in something that's more that is kind of more longer drawn out and is a bit more kind of just droney, really. So I think my voice comes through in the construction, the choice of the way it's sort of composed and the parameters that I put in there. And secondly, I had two to say and I've forgotten the second one. What was the question? Can you repeat the question? That might help it come back. Where's
your own voice with the generative?
The other thing is that today a mic stand is coming, and I've got a mic, and I'm gonna do a duet with the house at some point when everybody's out, and because this I'm gonna try and sing along with it and see how that sounds, because I am in the house and I am part of it, so it will be interesting to see how my voice kind of comes, kind of weaving in and out the sounds that are produced there. And I've got this the vocal harmonizer pedal that I bought while I was doing the residency, because I have got the worst. But I was one of those kids at school where people would turn around and laugh at, when you're singing hymns and stuff. I've got the worst singing voice ever, but I've got this harmony pedal that will hopefully allow me to sort of make noise alongside the devices and harmonize with them, and it not completely kind of destroy it. Yeah. So my voice, I'm not adverse to my voice being part of it. I think it's got to be in some way. It's just playing with the extent to which it kind of gets entangled up with the voice of the fridge or the voice of the pipes with the water running to the radiators or whatever else it is. Yeah.
Are you going to stream this duet?
Yes, I will. I'll have a practice first. I've been doing a monthly radio show on WCGX 90.7 FM in New York, where the house sings for an hour on FM, and I'm absolutely amazed that they've let me do it. So the next one of them is coming up at the start of October, and I think for that, because I have this new kind of generative-ish kind of way of working, I think I'll get involved in doing a bit of singing alongside the rest of the house for that. So I'll keep you posted, Martin.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Yeah, there's it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to formulate this into a question, so it might come out a bit garbled. But I was reflecting while you were talking a bit on some of the things you were saying about there's sort of an inherent, as a follow up to the last question, an inherent judgment around things like splitting things out into song and voice versus noise, and there's sort of judgments that are inherent in those words. And I just wondered if anything had kind of emerged from you. And again, I'm really interested in kind of sound and music as an art generally as a participatory process rather than an individualist product, I guess. And I just wondered if you had any reflections, I guess, on how you think language and the judgment inherent in the language that we use has kind of shaped and affected this work, and whether there was anything that's come out of that for you that in that kind of area, I suppose. Does that make any sense at all?
No, that makes total sense. That makes total sense because that's, I think, like something that I've wrestled with really, and because of the early broadcasts that I was doing, you could only really describe them as noise. I was not bothered about what it sounded like. I just wanted to be able to sort of let these processes have their moment. And it was super unpredictable. And some of it would be so discordant and unlistenable. I would be thinking, that anyone tuning into this will turn it off right away because I could barely listen to it in situ. And I really wrestle with that. Wanting to make something like harmonically coherent, but at the same time wanting it to reflect the fact that the environment that I'm in, if I'm honest, is quite incoherent and it is messy and it was unpredictable. So the whole process has been a real sort of wrestle between coherence and incoherence and sort of and I do feel a bit like maybe on reflection of the coherent side has won. It's still very unpredictable. It's just that the the results are now kind of processed through this kind of harmonic um uh, these harmonic filters that it becomes more voicey. Um So yeah, I think that the language of it has had an impact. I have been averse to noise, but at the idea of creating noise, but at the same time, I think the liveness of it is what is important. Because I could be recording these things, and I could be opening them up in like Ableton or whatever, and sequencing them and making something quite listenable out of them. But that wouldn't reflect the chaos that is my life and my home, quite frankly, and looking after two young kids and being stuck in the kitchen at 9 o'clock or whatever. So I have wrangled with it. But I think, yeah, I'm not sure. I think once things start harmonizing, they automatically become. I think I've been looking for ways to be with the things and for the things to be with each other to produce something whole. And I think the process of harmonizing and sort of arranging slightly the sound so they become, because I based it on the formation of a choir, the four different pitches. So I had four objects that were all singing at different pitches. And just that process, it starts to become more than noise just through that process of harmonizing. So that's a terrible answer to your question, but
I think it
it
was a.
is something that I'm wrangling.
I was going to say it's a terrible question anyway, so it was a really interesting answer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I care, but I also don't care. I don't know. Um, it's a wrestle. I've got a beef with sort of the aesthetics of noise music as well, and sort of the masculinity of it. I'm a bit like put off by, because when I was I've been searching for a home, I've kind of gone down those rabbit holes, and I'm not, I don't own enough black clothing. I don't visit Berlin enough to join that gang. You know, I'm stuck in the kitchen washing Pokemon underpants. So I think that disqualifies me from joining the noise gang anyway.
Is there a question here? Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, David. I wonder, as you were speaking, more and more about just thinking, okay, you're going to return to your life and your mundane objects soon. I wonder if there's anything that you've noticed that you do differently through fear of maybe not wanting to impact the noise of the fridge, or how has this sort of like almost visceral knowledge of these objects
Yeah,
impacted your
yeah,
actual behavior? It might be
yeah,
totally irrational.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point because our fridge makes some weird noises. I got it off my dad. He couldn't bear to live with it because it was so noisy, and now we have it. And I'm kind of loath to get rid of it. So it's and we yeah, I am. I feel like I really, really know all of the devices because I've been doing it for a couple of years, and I get excited. We got a new washing machine. The washing machine just broke. It was doing a cycle and it just made a load of weird noises and died. And we got a guy out to fix it, and he looked at it and he was like, "That's broke. You need a new one." And we bought a new one that day, obviously, because having kids, they make a mess when and I was really quite excited by this new washing machine, but it was dead quiet, really silent, and I was like, "Oh, that is like, um, that is an opportunity, I suppose." But you become kind of in my day-to-day life, become tuned into the difference in levels of quietness, I suppose, because once the kids have gone to bed, I'm operating in a very quiet environment. And you think, oh, quietness is quietness. But I guess now what I'm aware of is the nuances within that bracket of quietness. So we've gone from having a quite quiet washing machine to a very quiet washing machine. Um, but we have a very not quiet fridge. So, I think if anything, I've kind of really tuned into that sort of lower band of volume in the house. And yeah, yeah. So I've changed. That's kind of impact. That's how it's affected my sort of everyday behavior, I think. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, I think that's probably all we got time for. Dave, do you want to remind people where they can access all of this stuff if they want to hear more?
So the home song is vocal.systems. That's that's where that lives. And my personal website is evansdave.com. And there's a bunch of links on there to stuff that I've done, although I'm pretty poor at keeping up with it. And I did some writing for Watershed too, which is available while I was doing the residency, where I kind of go into a little bit more detail about some of the practical. I wrote 3 blogs, one which is basically 3 posts, one which was a bit of an introduction, one which is kind of technical-ish, and then the other one which was sort of reflection, sort of more theoretical, kind of philosophical reflections on it. So they're all all linked from my website at evansdave.com.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's been really lovely, even though I'm not there in the flesh. It's been really lovely to be back part of things at the Pervasive Media Studio. And thanks everybody for coming and listening to my talk. I really appreciate it.
All right. So before you go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team and we'll be happy to help. teams here. If you want to see some robot tortoises, go up to Dare Shack. Honestly, you should go. It's going to be good. It's on until 5 o'clock today, I think, and then over the weekend as well. If you're watching online, drop us a line at studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions, or go to Dare Shack. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next week.